neither
Metal
is a god or could kill God, and I do not care if there is a difference!
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we're here to talk about none other than Babymetal, who are one of the most recognizable and unique voices in modern metal. They're known for combining various genres of metal, such as death metal, thrash metal, metalcore, and all kinds of other stuff, all with the cutesy vocals of a Japanese idol group. Pretty strange combination, right? And yet somehow it totally works. And if you're not familiar, they sound like this. Definitely not what you expect from your average metal band, right? And yet they're crushing it, selling out arenas all over the world with millions of Spotify listeners. But they're also one of the most controversial bands in modern metal, because they didn't come together like your average metal band where they met in high school shop class or whatever. Instead, they were put together by a Japanese idol management group in the same way as we would think of a pop act like NSYNC or Backstreet Boys would be. And so the question is, how did they become some of the fastest rising stars in metal seemingly overnight? And even more importantly, what does their success say about metal fans? And of course, the question everybody asks about Babymetal, are they industry plants? Those are the questions that I will try to answer in this video. And also, I want to thank Exter for sponsoring this video. Exter is known for inventing the first trackable wallet, and now they're on a mission to upgrade the rest of your carry essentials. They make sustainable wallets, bags, and accessories to help you get more out of every day. One thing I like is that they're super slim, about half the size of a conventional wallet, but it still carries over 12 cards in cash. See? And you can get all your cards out by clicking this trigger. Very satisfying. And it has RFID protection to prevent data theft. It's also sustainable, made of materials like vegan Italian leather and space-grade aluminum. You can also track your wallet from your phone using the solar-powered tracking device. So if you want to check it out, use my code PUNKROCKMBA to get up to 45% off. Just hit the link in the description of this video. Our story begins back in 2009 when a music producer named Kobayashi Ken, better known as Babymetal, embarked on this idea of creating a fusion group that combined idols with metal. And if you're not familiar, the term idol in Japan essentially means an entertainer, usually a singer or some sort of social media personality. And the main appeal of those idols is their attractiveness and their usually manufactured personality, like Justin Bieber, Christina Aguilera, or Elvis Presley. And it doesn't seem that far off in terms of comparison to Western pop artists, but in this case, it's even a bit more industry manufactured. And to be clear, in my opinion, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the idea of putting together a group like this. In the eyes of a lot of American rock fans, there's sort of this idea that the performer and the songwriter have to be the same person, but I'm not sure that that has to be the case or that that's necessarily even realistic. Because if you think about it, there's very few people who have the star power, the capability to write music and perform it in a charismatic way. The number of people who have all of those three things is very, very small. And recognizing that, the Japanese music industry seeks out people who do have that charismatic star power and builds a team behind them who can help them with other stuff like marketing, writing their music, creating their look, and so forth. And in the eyes of Japanese fans, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how the industry works. How you feel about that is up to you, but just something to keep in mind as we go on. And getting back to the origin of Babymetal in particular, the producer Babymetal recognized the talents of Suzuka Nakamoto from her prior group called Karen Girls, and he envisioned her as the perfect fit for this new group that he had in mind. The group was officially formed in 2010 in Tokyo, Japan, as a subset of an already established female idol ensemble called Sakura Gakuin, which they referred to as the Heavy Music Club. And right out of the gate, Babymetal did get some initial traction on their early singles, as well as festival appearances all over Japan and in other places in Asia like Singapore, but nothing that really stood out compared to their other peers in the idol industry. And back then, they were pretty much completely unknown in the West, other than maybe some people who were super into Japanese culture, aka weeaboos. But all of that was about to change in the year 2013. The two singles that they released that year, called Jime Dame Zettai and Megitsune, earned them a whole lot more attention than they had gotten before. And this is right about the time when you may have started to hear a little bit more about them on the West in any kind of larger scale, all of which culminated in the release of their debut self-titled album, which came out in February of 2014. And as most of you know, for Babymetal, this was a really big deal. If you were reading metal blogs at the time, this was like one of the main topics of conversation among metal fans for that entire year. Every metal outlet was covering them all the time, but to me, what was even more interesting is that they were able to get the attention of people who typically don't even listen to metal at all. To give you an example of what I mean, the video for Gimme Chocolate currently sits at 200 million views, and the biggest reaction channel on YouTube did a video about them where they had various big YouTubers react to Babymetal, and that video itself has millions of views.
They just look like they're having so much fun. Like,
look, I could just imagine myself being at this show.
This was much more than just another album that made waves in the metal scene. This was like something that penetrated into mainstream pop culture. And musically, this album is completely all over the place, but I think in a good way. It essentially combined elements of every major metal subgenre while having these Japanese idol archetypes on vocals. For example, it has songs that are just like straight up power metal, while at the same time having moments that are just pure death metal. And what I think really stood out about the way that Babymetal approached genre bending is that for a lot of artists, they try to do it in a way that feels seamless and natural. For example, if you listen to a band like A Day to Remember, where they combine metalcore and pop punk, but it still just really feels like this one cohesive thing that feels like a very organic, natural blend. But with Babymetal, it is the exact opposite of that. With them, they did it more with the intent of seemingly to shock the listener, where these genre changes just come out of nowhere in a really jarring, chaotic kind of way. And at first, I was not really the biggest fan of Babymetal. The exact moment that converted me to a fan is I went to Santa Barbara on a honeymoon with my wife after we got married. We went to a Japanese store there called Daiso, and they were playing some like crazy metal in the store. I couldn't quite make it out, but I was like, what in the fuck is this? This is like nothing else I've ever heard before. And then I realized it was Babymetal. I gave them another shot, and I became a fan. Like I said, it took a little bit of time for me to get used to it, but once I got what they were going for, it really made sense to me. And of course, from a marketing standpoint, it's brilliant. To have these three teenage girls singing these cutesy choruses and then pull out some kind of weird metal shit completely out of left field. It's the kind of thing that if you're a really serious fan of metal, you can listen to it and sort of understand these references that they're picking out. And if you're not a metal fan, it just is this crazy over-the-top spectacle. And put it in terms of YouTube, it just makes for great content.
What the hell? Is this the same video?
There's no way it's the same song. What?
This is sick.
But despite the massive success that they were having both in Asia and in the Western markets, the average metal fan definitely was not on board with them. And I think there's a lot of reasons as to why. I think the biggest one is that metal fans value what they perceive to be authenticity. And like I said earlier, that aspect of like individual craftsmanship in the music that they consume. So to them, for Babymetal to come out as this thing that was very clearly manufactured by the industry to be as marketable as possible just didn't really sit right with them, especially because it came out also that the girls themselves really didn't know or care about metal at all before they did the group. But to their credit, even though the group itself is most definitely manufactured as a product to make as much money as possible, which to be clear, I don't think is a bad thing. That's the case for lots of movies and TV shows and video games that we like, and I don't really see why music would be any different. But that aside, it's clear that the people who are the creative forces behind Babymetal most definitely do have a genuine passion for the genre. For one, Babymetal, who is the main mastermind behind the group, he's not just some guy from the music industry that cooked up this idea of Babymetal purely for money. Sure, obviously that's part of it, but he is a genuine metalhead, and I think Babymetal was really a passion project for him, where he was able to sort of combine these two worlds that he loved into one thing. And in terms of the backing band, which has had various different people in it over the years, many of which were in very legit established bands, and across the board, these are some of the most tight, technically proficient players that you're going to find in the entire industry. And if it wasn't for Babymetal, the guys in the backing band wouldn't have the platform that they do, which number one allows them to show off their skill to the world, and number two allows them to make a lot more money than they would grinding it out in clubs playing to 100 or 200 people a night. But with all of that said, considering how much they just sort of exploded onto the scene with that first album, a lot of people were wondering if this was just a flash in the pan or if the band could stick around for the long term. Well, that question was more or less answered with their second album, Metal Resistance, which came out in March of 2016. And with this one, they played it a lot more straight than on the first album, although they still obviously had the whole like teenage girls doing metal kind of shtick. But this time the songs were a little bit less zany and more serious. They also toned down the genre bending aspect quite a bit, with the transitions being a lot more smooth, and just overall not having so much of that effect of like, what in the fuck did I just hear? The songs are definitely still diverse and very different from each other, but in a little bit more of a natural way. For example, the opening track, Road of Resistance, which is sort of power metal inspired, even featuring Herman Lee of Dragon Force. While on the other hand, you have a song like From Dusk Till Dawn, which is pretty clearly inspired by what Bring Me the Horizon was doing at the time. And it seemed like with all of this, their goal was to take Babymetal from being what very much could have been a flash in the pan and turn that into a long-term project that could be around for years and years to come. And it's fair to say that they succeeded, because not only is this album sonically better than their debut, according to most people, but it proved that they were here to stay. Because as everyone watching this knows, not only are they still around, but they are more popular than ever. And overall, this album was a massive success, just like their first one. For one, Koba Metal received an Excellence Award from the Association of Media and Digital, or AMD, in Japan for his role in elevating the band's international success. And after the release of Metal Resistance, they made history as the very first Japanese act to headline Wembley Arena in London. And to top it all off, Triple H announced that their song Karate would be one of the themes for WWE's NXT TakeOver, which, as we all know, if you have made it into the WWE as a metal band, you're pretty much at the top of the heap. And after a lot of touring, they started teasing their next release. In April of 2018, they put out a YouTube video called Metal Resistance Episode 7, The Revelation. And this video introduced the concept of a dark side within Babymetal, inhabited by the quote-unquote 7 metal spirits, teasing the beginning of a new era.
An unknown dark side also exists. A legend of 7 metal spirits. The Chosen 7.
And this is probably a good place for us to get into the whole lore aspect of the band, where in their live show, they present themselves as one of the conduits of the Fox God, aka the 10 Tails from Naruto. I think this is some sort of a character in Japanese folklore, where they exist to spread their message through his music. They also do a fox sign with their hands instead of the traditional metal horns in a lot of their promotional material. And if you're into that sort of thing and you want to know more, they also released a graphic novel called Apocrypha, The Legend of Babymetal, back in 2018. And eventually, after all of that, in October of 2019, they released their third album called Metal Galaxy. And on that album, they more or less picked up where they left off with Metal Resistance, while also including some new influences that fit in surprisingly well with their sound. For example, some Indian influences on the song Shanti Shanti Shanti. In that same year, they were the very first Japanese band ever to play at the Forum in LA. And initially, they had planned another big touring cycle around the album, but as you might guess, COVID ended up putting a stop to all that, although there were still some interesting developments happening regardless. Most notably, they were featured on a Bring Me the Horizon song called Kingslayer, which ended up being one of their most popular songs. And after that, in December of 2020, they commemorated their first decade as a band with the release of their retrospective album 10 Babymetal Years. And around a year later, they put out a cryptic video message hinting at a significant transition, which a lot of fans interpreted as them either going on hiatus or breaking up forever. The three metal spirits that have been shining since 2010, even if they were to leave Earth, would continue to shine forever in our hearts and across the metal galaxy. A legend turns into a myth, which turns into a living legend. What lies ahead beyond the end of the stairway to becoming a living legend is something only the Fox God knows. But despite all the speculation, in October of 2022, they announced their fourth album called The Other One, which ended up releasing in March of 2023. And this was definitely their most focused work to date. For one, this was the first time that the girls themselves had any sort of input in the composition department, most notably the lyrics for Divine Attack, which were written solely by the lead vocalist Suzuka Nakamoto, aka Su-Metal. And musically, this album is essentially if you combine sort of everything happening in modern metal with influences of J-rock. For example, the song Monochrome has some parts that really wouldn't be out of place on an Architects song. And they also pretty much completely ditched the whole like cutesy teenage girls gimmick, which was the right move to make because the girls in the group at that time were in their mid-20s, and that whole thing was kind of weird to begin with, at least from the perspective of Americans. And it's to their benefit because I would consider this their best and most consistent album to date. Which brings us to the last question of this video. What is their lasting impact? The main one, I think, is that they introduced metal to a group of people that otherwise probably would never have gotten into it. They essentially appeal to that like otaku, weeaboo, theater kid kind of demographic that's into anime or maybe games like League of Legends, which is an absolutely massive group of people that no other metal band had really been able to tap into before. Another thing is the fact that they were really the first metal band to really make it big out of Japan, which I would imagine probably inspired a lot of other people in Japan to see if they could do the same things themselves. And so with that in mind, I really don't think it's a coincidence at all that Japanese metal bands like Cold Rain or Crystal Lake got traction in the West after Babymetal broke through. But I think really their biggest contribution is that they went from being really what is essentially a bunch of industry plants to now being something that is more and more closely resembling genuine artists, meaning that the people in the band have more and more input on the songwriting while also ditching a lot of those gimmicks and taking it a lot more seriously than they did in the beginning. And although there's nothing at all wrong with gimmicks, I think it's cool that they didn't just sort of ditch the group and throw it away as soon as like the cutesy girl gimmick had run its course, which you see a lot of times with idol music or for that matter with Western pop music. That certainly would have been the easy route to take, but instead they chose to stick around and reinvent themselves year after year after year and become something really totally different. And since they are really still a fairly new band, all things considered by metal standards, I think they have a bright future ahead of them, and I'm excited to see what their next move is. All right, everybody, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. And also, I'd like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my videos early. I do giveaways and Q&As sometimes, and there's a way to have me review your music. So if any of that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off, but I will see you next time.